want to do this. I want to give up and I want to die. Okay. Here we go. Hola, hola, amigos. My cheeriness is a facade, and I've never wanted to crawl into a hole and never emerge more than at this very moment. Kidding! Aha ha ha aha. The date is May 1st, 2018, and the time is 2:35 p.m. Today I want to welcome you back onto Milk and Bookies, your local source of unsolicited, unwelcomed opinions on the literary materials that are ranked so highly on our unspoken societal spectrum of cultural staples. On this episode, I would like to establish that I am not in any way or form qualified to be giving these comments, especially about the books that I can objectively recognize as profound artistic works. However, simply writing down these thoughts, forming personal connections and ideologies based on something as substantial as a book, develops these literary analysis qualities that I, as well as my parents, LMAO, are seeking. I encourage you to do the same. Yahoo! This warning has been issued 3 episodes too late, and need I remind you that this is only the 3rd episode. Now, the reason for my excessive statement about my literal lack of justification for this entire project as a whole is because of the book that we will be discussing on this very fine day. Jokes, it's raining. Actually, I'm writing this beforehand, and I have no idea what weather will prevail on the day I actually record this, so I will leave it a time now for my future self to insert the weather conditions. Why, thank you, Past Cheryl. The current weather condition is sunny. It is actually surprisingly bright outside. There's like very few clouds in the sky. But it has been raining these past few days. But all humor aside, the topic of today's discussion is Fahrenheit 451 or 451 by the legendary Ray Bradbury, a notable literary classic that I will both honor and disappoint by saying that I read and thoroughly enjoyed, but much of the symbolism flew over my head. Definitely. With that acknowledgement, you know what time it is. Synopsis time. So, everyone knows the premise, I think. Not gonna lie, I didn't until I saw this very ominous post on Instagram about it. I won't go into it too much. Oh, who am I kidding? Yes, I am. So it's this Tumblr screenshot of a discussion thread based on a picture of Fahrenheit 451, a physical copy of which, but with an ironic twist, which is that the spine of the book is actually a striking surface for combustion, and the version of the book is sold with a package of matches. The foundation of this adaptation is that the book is easily flammable and can be burned by the reader or anyone, really. One of the first comments asked pointedly, who would burn a book? Or something of the sort, but the response to that was, clearly you haven't read Fahrenheit 451. And so from that, I deduced that it concerned burnings of books, but nothing outside of that. It wasn't until I got my gritty baby hands on the touchable novel that I read the following synopsis. Fahrenheit 451 is the temperature at which book paper burns. Fahrenheit 451 is a novel set in the perhaps near future when firemen burn books forbidden by a totalitarian Brave New World regime. The hero, according to Mr. Bradbury, is a book burner who suddenly discovers that books are flesh and blood ideas and cry out silently when put to the torch. Today, when libraries and schools in this country and all over the world are still, quote-unquote, burning certain books, Fahrenheit 451 remains a brilliantly readable and suspenseful work of even greater impact and timelessness. So, time to really get started, huh? Main themes. To be honest, I'm scared due to the vast population of our modern society that is so sensitive towards opinions of this book, and for good reason, I suppose. But they, of all people, should understand that a noticeable mismatch of opinions is what differentiates our society from the dystopian one from within Fahrenheit 451. In a world where the government brainwashes the public into conformity of rhetoric and solely advocates for, like, uniformity, I guess, The absence of diversity and conflict of interest is what defines the very horror of this dystopia. Therefore, I will offer my unsolicited opinion as per usual without that guilt. I guess that I should very much have the freedom to express these perspectives, especially regarding this novel. So the main themes that I've inferred are as follows. 1. Revelation. 2. Priority. And 3. Democracy. Ooh, what a handful of a main theme. Let's get cracking. So, let's talk about revelation. So revelation was essentially learning things that are changing your preconceived perceptions of the world around you. Guy Montag, the main character, who is a firefighter that is consistently sent to burn books with a feeling of guilt, begins discovering throughout the book that everything he once thought was right and all the actions that had once given him a rush now exasperate him and exhaust all of his late night pondering. Some examples of such would be A, when he realizes that books hold important and intriguing information and that they aren't disruptive pieces of rubbish like the government so desperately wants the public to believe. B, and I'm kind of just listing revelations now, that there are more things to life than work and his wife. When Guy meets Clarice, it becomes apparent to him what kind of life he idolizes and what components of living he never knew he missed. What we see as everyday occurrences like laughing, going on heights, and both figuratively and physically stopping to smell the flowers are looked down upon, but Clarice and her family live the way we do, or at least our somewhat hipsters / laid-back people in our society live. His desires and standards are shifting into things that he could never have fathomed before. C. Montag used this, he used to experience a rush when he burned books. He loved the ash and the crisp. He enjoyed the slow combustion and rapid spreading of the fire. He got off. That's a questionable word to use, but he got off on the adrenaline of it all, and he received a rush at the utter destruction and the rawness of the destruction that he was causing. It's a recurring theme of Revelation, that all the main character knew is no longer the universal truth that he thought it was. Nothing is as it seems, and the unexpected wasn't expected enough. This almost constant changing, flipping, and flickering of the fire that is known as Montag's beliefs adds a literal spark to the novel, to the story, and to his character arc as a whole. The way you can visualize the wind changing directions, a fish jerking around on dry land, or the flames of a campfire quivering, his ideology and hope and dreams are oscillating. At the end of the book, Montag's character is so well defined. I mean, God, yes, please. His world is black and white, lacking any color of middle ground except for the eternal red of flames and explosions, or what he thought was eternal. But let me tell you why this non-stop variation makes the book special and why it's so unique about Fahrenheit 451. The novel is already action-packed, but a ceaseless changing of rhetoric equates to an underlying current of continual motion. It keeps the story moving and the book alive even when no one is moving and the situation is merely a character, let's say, sitting alone in a bleak parlor. Especially in a book like Fahrenheit 451, where most of the takeaways are metaphorical and philosophical, the physical action is only a carrier method to convey the hidden meanings of the story, and the true gem is the emotion it evokes and the symbolism it fosters. Without the veiled conflict of interests, the book is only filled to the brim with empty fights and hollow fires. Fahrenheit 451 needs this hidden but continuous struggle and progress. It's indispensable to the impact of the entirety of the novel. And if you're thinking, sure, constant motion is cool, but it's present with a lot of other books, well then get this. Here's the kicker about Fahrenheit 451 in particular. All the revelations are in light of what we currently recognize as the status quo, and by we, I mean the developed world. All of Montag's realizations aren't actually new to us, they're commonplace. He should have already known that, we think. He realizes that burning books is government propaganda, not an actual necessary measure. We already knew that. He realizes that books are important and that they're really capable of teaching crucial lessons about life. That's not news to us. He realizes that he's lying to himself but following the firehouse's orders blindly, and that wasn't a surprise to any of the readers. He realizes that he's living in a dying civilization and that his lifestyle isn't the perfect one that he, as well as the people around him, thought it was. Like, duh. This does two things. Firstly, it forces the readers to undergo the same realization. Fahrenheit 451 starts off really slow, and I would argue it's because the author is trying to set the foundation of the world and of Montag's character. Because we started at negative square one, when we reach square two, where Montag begins to have bombshell discoveries, it doesn't seem natural to us. We've traveled up the steps to his realization with him, and when all the strings have been unstrung, it unsettles us as much as it does Montag. Or at least we can completely sympathize with him. Our deep understanding of the world and the protagonist simply makes the book more immersive, and outstanding. The fact that it can force us to neglect our status quo and become fully part of the dystopia is what makes Fahrenheit 451 the thrilling read that it is known to be. But two, it also illustrates the toxicity of the dystopia. Since the world of Fahrenheit 451 is so stark in contrast to ours, it isn't challenging to be agitated by the lifestyles portrayed in the novel. However, Ray Bradbury uses inner conflict and resolution as a tool to further convey the cancerous nature of that society. Without Montag's revelations, we would almost be desensitized to this dystopian feeling. It's just another book about melancholy and government propaganda, blah blah blah, big deal. Without Montag's revelations, it's a one-sided story. If he just gradually became a better person, or even merely continued living his typical life, the book would be immersive in a different way, in a way where readers are seeing its world like a shallow pond, with a ripple here and there, and enough decline to dip your toes in, but not enough to submerge yourself underwater. Without Montag's revelations, Fahrenheit 451 would somehow feel like even more of a monologue, because it doesn't provide readers with an opportunity to link the protagonist and his society to their own. It is only through Montag's revelations that readers can fully see the fine lines and transition between their current society and its dystopian counterpart. There are numerous parallels that, without a main character navigating in between them, could not have been exposed. The revelations that Montag undergoes shows us how different and toxic his world is, through allowing him to discover our world and how strange it feels to him. It's almost reverse psychology, but hey, it's working. So to summarize this main theme, a continual stir of change and epiphanies keep the storyline in constant motion, and the readers remain compelled, even when there is a lack of action and actual movement in the text. For a book like Fahrenheit 451, this underlying metaphorical motion is indispensable so that there is time and energy to be spent on the vital life lessons that Bradbury would like to infer. Additionally, without these revelations, that dystopian world would become less immersive, interactive, and engaging. It is the direction and frequency of these realizations that subtly inform the readers that a dystopian society is not so far-fetched, and in actuality will always be centered around something unimaginably yet inherently evil. The string of revelations about society, knowledge, and self-discovery is what makes Fahrenheit 451 Fahrenheit 451.
Okay, I just had some cookies and some drink, so I'm back and I feel refreshed, baby.
So, now the second theme that I have for you all here, it's a direct follow-up to the first theme of Revelation. The second theme for today is priority, realizing that everything you thought was important is less important than before, and now doing something about it. And that's exactly how I differentiate the two themes. Revelation was the realization. Priority is the implementation. It's taking action for all these revelations that he experiences and having to move your priorities around by constantly shifting, sacrificing your time and family for the bettering of the society. I want to point out that this theme specifically, because while Montag's revelations was what made the book genuine and sincerely profound, without actually applying these realizations to the tangible universe, it would amount to next to nothing. So let's find a new example, or a few more. We see Montag start living his life differently due to his fluctuations in priority, and from my memory, albeit poor, this can be observed when he lashes out at Millie and her friends in the parlor because they're being ignorant little pests. See, in that sentence right there, Montag probably never really cared about their doings before the revelation that their lives are all masked fantasies. Once he realized how oblivious, naive, and plain disrespectful Millie and her friends were being, He showed his newfound knowledge by trying to educate them during their stay over. It failed miserably, but even the failure shows how much Montague now cares about living a wholehearted and cultured life, more than, say, his reputation among the people that he had once cared extremely deeply for. This is a shift in priority. Ooh, I just thought of one. Remember that time Montague literally killed a guy? What was his name again? Captain Bastard? Captain Beatty. But yeah, he was an ass. So the murder, well, that's one thing, and I'll talk about it in the discussion period, but in that moment, Montague prioritized the greater good of saving more literature and waking up his society over his reputation, criminal record, and life, honestly. Shift in priority. My final piece of evidence, even though there are much more, would be that when Montague left the city, found hobos in the countryside, decided to leave his family and friends for them, and ultimately watched his town and wife get bombed because he wanted to become a part of the alliance to #SaveTheBooks2026. Shift in priority. I know I described all of them with this negative connotation attached to them, but from another perspective, that's exactly what happened. Although even I admit to liking the courses of action taken, they were no doubt drastic and dramatic. These shifts in priority further pushed the impacts of the first theme, and was a theme that represented the physical manifestation of the more psychological undertones of the prior. But let's move on to my third theme, and I'm going to try to keep this short because we've really been talking about main themes for way too long. I'm literally getting a headache. So, democracy, throughout the book and clearly woven into the purpose of its existence for the novel itself, is a strong advocacy of every member of society to have the liberty to their own thoughts and sources of knowledge. Bradbury dedicated a lot of time to showing the downsides of government control, censorship, and publicity. It's easy to observe that books are important. Being able to think for yourself is important, and making your own decisions is important. If these acts cannot be fulfilled, you could end up living the life Montague did until he realized the need to do so differently. The dystopia that Bradbury paints isn't actually that far off, and shows the extent to which government propaganda can actually go. This is an especially relevant theme right now, almost more so than when the book was published. With issues like Cambridge Analytica, censorship, and the recent Bill C-51 Anti-Terrorism Act debate, the government right to its citizens' information versus the people's right to privacy are heavily controversial topics at the moment. Fahrenheit 451, or more importantly, Bradbury. Rad? I just said... I guess he's pretty rad. Or more importantly, Ray Bradbury displays his stance on the matter by negatively picturing a world where this challenge isn't a political argument, but a reality. Oh boy. Over with these stupid main themes. We've been talking about them way too long, and even I'm tired. And I sat down and wrote them. I hate my past self. Who are we kidding? I hate my current self. Okay, alright. Let's get cracking on this personal review. Honestly, the book was most definitely amazing and all, but a lot of the symbolism and hidden meanings probably flew over my head. And no, not because it was poorly written or anything of the sort. It was just quite wordy and complex in content and in writing style, so you've got to be somewhat of an intellect to fully grasp the underlying connotations in their entirety. I, quite frankly, am not. And even if I wasn't in my best condition to be worrying about whether or not so-and-so was a metaphor for anthropogenic apocalypse. Like, in hindsight, it was very overwhelming. To save you from the irony that would be overcomplicating my own personal review, here are my favorite and least favorite things about Fahrenheit 451. Initially, I had planned for my favorites to go first, but I think I'm going to start with my least favorites just so that we can end on a brighter note. So, some of my least favorite things about Fahrenheit 451 would be 1, the background. I'll talk about this later, but I felt that the book started too late. I really wondered about Montague's life before the book because that's when he started realizing his wrongdoings, and everyone around him dismissed it as normal activity until it was over the line. It made me question his personal story and growth before, ultimately becoming the tool for this revolution and message that the author needed. I'm not sure if I'm making sense or if this concern is even valid after a long time after reading the book, but it's just something that bothered me while I was reading. So the second least favorite thing that I have or second. I don't even know how to prioritize this, but it was the emotions. Now, this is going to be difficult to explain. However, I felt as though the book was a bit apathetic. Perhaps it was just me reading with a blind mindset, but even when he was describing Montag's thoughts and emotions, there seemed to be a chasm in between me as a reader and him as a character. I shared this concern of mine to my friend, who also read the... Actually, he's not my friend. He's an acquaintance at most. He's a peer. Not even if he's... he's just like a cold body to me. Anyways, I shared it with him, and he also read the book in accordance with me, but he didn't feel the same way. He thought it was quite an emotional read, so this really is one of my personal issues. Sort of building on the one before, my third and final least favorite thing is the overall mood of the book. My problem with it is that it rarely changed. While Montag changed as a person, his friends began changing, his priorities were shifting, and the mood of the book never changed. It was the same dreary and dystopian mood throughout, and I can justify this, like, it makes sense. I only feel that it could have been better, and it kind of undermined all the revelation and realization within the book, and the novel as a whole. It really could have been improved with a stark contrast of moods from the start and beginning. I do admit, however, that the last few scenes had a drastically different mood, which I in turn really appreciate. Overall, it was a marvelous book. I think that my personal review was overly flawed this time around, but that's because of human error, like my human error. But before I get onto the discussion questions, I want to try a new segment known as a dramatic reading of, in which I simply read an excerpt of the book in sort of my own feel or vibe of the book and see sort of what you can take from that. So I'm going to read just a short 2 paragraphs that are very much near the end of the book, after Montag, spoiler alert, runs away from the town and sort of, well, I'm not going to spoil too much, just now that I think about it, it's so awkward to read. Anyways, oh yeah, this is when he's in the river. Okay. He floated on his back when the valise filled and sank. The river was mild and leisurely, going away from the people who ate shadows for breakfast and steam for lunch and vapors for supper. The river was very real. It held him comfortably and gave him the time at last, the leisure, to consider this month, this year, and a lifetime of years. He listened to his heart slow. His thoughts stopped rushing with his blood. He saw the moon low in the sky now. The moon there, and the light of the moon caused by what? By the sun, of course. And what lights the sun? Its own fire. And the sun goes on, day after day, burning and burning. The sun and time and burning, burning. The river bobbled him along gently. Burning. The sun and every clock on the earth. It all came together and became a single thing in his mind. After a long time of floating on the land and a short time of floating in the river, he knew why he must never, ever burn again in his life. The sun burned every day. It burned time. The world rushed in a circle and turned on its axis, and time was busy burning the years and the people away anyway, without any help from him. So if he burned things with the firemen and the sun burned time, that meant that everything burned. One of them had to stop burning. The sun wouldn't, certainly. So it looked as if it had to be Montag and the people he had worked with until just a few hours ago. Somewhere the saving and putting away had to begin again, and someone had to do the saving and keeping one way or another, in books, in records, in people's heads, any way at all, so long as it was safe, free from moths, silverfish, rust, and dry rot, and men with matches. So that was that. That really gives you a look into his type of writing style and the type of messages he's trying to convey, and what type of style and what type of symbolism that he uses in order to portray that, what type of metaphors he likes to use, and what mentality he had sort of as he was writing this book, which I think was really interesting. I did add a few words for dramatic flair, I guess, in that excerpt. So it was pretty much verbatim, but if you do want to read it or have read it before, you'll notice that I changed 2 words, I think. So look out for that. I mean, shout out if you want to try to find that page number or list the exact context of the scene. So with that aside, I hope that suffices. Fahrenheit 451 was a difficult book to critique because A, it had so many layers, a number of which I probably didn't even notice. It was deep, poetic, and emotional, 3 themes that are subjective but fundamentally present. It was strange and confusing, but in the best way possible. And B, anything I can say and will be held against me should it be controversial or mean-spirited. Hopefully that wasn't any of my review came off as, but hey, you need to have an audience to have haters, and I do not have either. C, I don't know how to critique, why am I even here? But with the review and my personal opinions out of the way, let's hear what you lovelies have to say with our discussion questions. So the first discussion question is, what were some shortcomings of Fahrenheit 451? As a well-known literary classic, it isn't often that you hear negative feedback on the composition, and for good reason. While it's a wonderfully executed novel, no book is without sin. As to reference Cinema Sins, a legendary YouTube channel. I think there are others in the world that might also be afraid of reprimanding the critically acclaimed novel. However, there are some improvements or modifications that could be made to better the entirety of the book. Mainly, I think that more backstory was needed. And I know, before anyone pounces on me, there was already an immense amount of backstory, and all the important bits have already been included. But I just had my doubts. All of his interactions with others seemed so strained and wrong, but other parties rarely take notice. This either means that A, Montag has always been secluded and bad at conversing, or B, no one notices or cares about his sudden change in tone. Especially the way he treats Millie and Clarice becomes so diverged further in the book. It's strange. If he feels resentment towards her mentality and he can't tolerate her lifestyle, what were they doing for all the years before? Did he just not pay attention to her? Did it take him this long to realize that perhaps they don't fit well together? Why does he even love her? Did it only take one girl named Clarice to change his entire mindset and essentially ruin his marriage? To Clarice, now that we're on her topic, he treats her much softer and kinder than anyone else, and you're telling me that no one noticed or questioned it properly, not to mention how distant he is to the firefighters. Further down the line, Mildred realizes that he is in fact acting strange. That implies that he used to be more open and free. So what happened in between the time that he started acting differently and the book? I say the book because even in the opening chapter, all of his relationships seem unhealthy in a way that entails that even before the book, he was beginning to doubt the world around him. Then what happened? Why didn't the book start there? I know it's super shallow and that I didn't read the novel in my best state anyways, but that was an aspect of the work that I felt I needed closure on. Discussion question number 2, was the murder of Captain Beatty justified? So, justified is a really loose term. Did it need to happen for Montag to achieve his ultimate goal of, I don't know, achieving ultimate nirvana by reading books? Of course not. If he had a plan to escape to the countryside, it could have been executed without killing Beatty, especially because his murder led to the authorities chasing him, which only deterred his plan. However, it did influence him to go to the countryside and cover his tracks more carefully. Without it, there's no doubt that the outcome would be vastly different and more likely to fail. So yeah, it was justified. Besides, it added a nice flair to the book. Get it? Flair? Because Beatty got burned alive? It's sadistically funny. Anyways, it was artistic and impactful, so I would argue that Beatty's death, and specifically murder, was justified. There's definitely more to it, but I'll leave that to you. You can't see it, but I'm winking. Provocatively. Just kidding. So I hope to hear from you lovelies someday, maybe if I become a big deal or something cool. You never know, right? Hit me up. On that note, bye boos. This was the 3rd episode of your beloved podcast, Milk and Bookies, the best community podcast for cultured hipsters and their moms. If you hated the first 2 episodes, well, 3rd time's the charm, right? If you hated this episode as well, sorry, I guess. Today's episode was a bit flimsy and unbalanced, but be prepared for much better, more concrete episodes in the next few weeks and hopefully forever, I guess. For the 4th episode of Milk and Bookies, please feel free to read Simon versus the Homo sapien. Oh, Jesus Christ, I can't talk. Why do a podcast when you can't even speak eloquently? Please feel free to read Simon versus the Homo sapien Agenda by Becky Albertalli. Yeah, you know, the book that Love, Simon is based on. Go read that. P.S. I chose a really bad song for this type of episode. I know, don't beat me up over it. This has been Milk and Bookies Season 1, Episode 3. I'm Cheryl, your swanky-danky host, and let's look forward to Episode 4 together. Milk and Bookies, Cheryl, signing out. Peace.